The story of Athaliah begins not with her own actions, but with the shadow cast by her infamous mother, Jezebel. Jezebel, queen of Israel, was known for her cunning, her devotion to the god Baal, and her ruthless pursuit of power. Athaliah grew up in this dangerous environment, watching her mother manipulate kings and crush those who opposed her. Power, Jezebel taught her daughter, was the only thing worth having, and fear was the way to keep it. "You must never hesitate," Jezebel had told Athaliah once, her voice as sharp as the dagger she held. "A moment's doubt can cost you everything. Rule with strength, or you will be ruled by weakness." Athaliah had taken her mother's words to heart. When Athaliah came of age, she was married off to Jehoram, the son of King Jehoshaphat of Judah. The marriage was political, a union meant to forge an alliance between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. But for Athaliah, it was more than that. It was her opportunity to carve out a legacy of her own. In Jerusalem, Athaliah found herself in a kingdom very different from her mother's. While Israel was steeped in the worship of Baal, Judah still honored the Lord. The temple stood as a symbol of the people's faith, a faith that Athaliah neither respected nor understood. She saw it as a threat to her ambitions. "This temple," Athaliah said to Jehoram one evening as they walked through the city, "it holds too much sway over the people. They cling to old traditions when they should be looking to the future." Jehoram glanced at her uneasily. "The people of Judah revere the Lord," he said. "It is our faith that has guided us through trials." Athaliah's eyes narrowed. "Faith doesn't win battles, Jehoram. Strength does. You are a king. Act like one." Jehoram, her husband, was a weak king, easily swayed by Athaliah's ambitions. Under her influence, Judah began to change. Shrines to Baal appeared in the cities, and altars to the Lord were destroyed. The people whispered of her growing power, comparing her to her mother, Jezebel. Athaliah thrived on the fear she inspired, but her path to power was not without resistance. The priests of the Lord, led by the high priest Jehoiada, continued their work in secret. They saw Athaliah as a usurper, a danger to Judah's covenant with God. "She is not our queen," Jehoiada told a small group of priests one night. "Her heart is as wicked as Jezebel's. We must hold fast to the Lord's ways, no matter the cost." When Jehoram died, his son Ahaziah took the throne. Ahaziah was young and inexperienced, a puppet for his mother's will. Athaliah ruled through him, tightening her grip on Judah. But Ahaziah's reign was short-lived. During a battle in Israel, he was killed, leaving the throne of Judah without an heir. For Athaliah, the loss of her son was not a moment of grief, it was an opportunity. With no male heir to challenge her, she seized the throne for herself, declaring herself queen. Her rule was unprecedented. No woman had ever ruled Judah before. "It is my right," Athaliah proclaimed before the royal court. "I will bring order to Judah and lead this kingdom to greatness." The court murmured their assent, though fear rather than loyalty kept their voices quiet. But her ascension came at a terrible cost. To secure her position, Athaliah ordered the massacre of the royal family, her own grandchildren included. The halls of the palace echoed with cries of betrayal and terror as her soldiers carried out her orders. "Leave no one alive," Athaliah commanded coldly. "No heirs, no challengers. Judah's throne belongs to me now." Yet amid the bloodshed, One child was spared. Joash, the infant son of Ahaziah, was whisked away by Jehosheba, Athaliah's stepdaughter and the wife of the high priest Jehoiada. She hid the child in the temple of the Lord, where he was raised in secret. Jehosheba cradled the baby as she whispered to Jehoiada, "We must protect him. He is the last hope for David's line." Jehoiada nodded solemnly. "The Lord has preserved him for a reason. We will keep him safe, no matter the cost." Athaliah, unaware of Joash's survival, believed her position was unshakable. She ruled Judah with an iron fist, forcing the people to worship Baal and silencing anyone who opposed her. The temple of the Lord was neglected, its priests forced into hiding. But in the shadows of the temple, hope remained. Jehoiada and Jehosheba knew that Joash was the rightful king, the last of David's line. They bided their time, waiting for the moment when they could challenge Athaliah and restore Judah to righteousness. Athaliah's reign was marked by fear and bloodshed, but it was also fragile. The people of Judah, though cowed, resented her rule. Whispers of rebellion began to spread, whispers that would one day grow into a roar. Unbeknownst to Athaliah, the secret she thought buried was still alive, and it would be her undoing. Athaliah's reign over Judah was built on fear and bloodshed, but even fear could not silence every voice. Whispers of discontent grew louder with each passing year. The people resented her iron rule, her devotion to Baal, and the desecration of their sacred temple. Yet Athaliah remained confident, convinced that she had crushed every threat to her power. What she didn't know was that her most dangerous enemy was growing up in the shadow of the very temple she sought to destroy. Joash, the last surviving heir of David, was alive. He had been hidden as an infant by his aunt Jehosheba and raised in secret by her husband, the high priest Jehoiada. Inside the temple, Joash was no ordinary child. The priests taught him about the God of Israel, about his ancestor King David, and about the covenant that bound Judah to the Lord. Though he was only a boy, Joash carried the weight of his lineage. One evening, Joash stood with Jehoiada in a quiet corner of the temple. The flickering lamplight cast long shadows across the walls, illuminating the sacred scrolls that Jehoiada had laid before him. "Do you know why we have kept you hidden, Joash?" Jehoiada asked, his voice low and solemn. Joash nodded. "Because Athaliah would kill me if she knew I was alive." Jehoiada placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Yes, but it's more than that. You are not just a survivor. You are the rightful king of Judah. One day, you will sit on the throne and lead our people back to the Lord." Joash's young face was a mix of determination and fear. "How will I do that? I'm just a boy." Jehoiada smiled. "You won't be alone. The Lord is with you, and when the time comes, the people will stand with you too." Meanwhile, Athaliah's grip on the kingdom was beginning to falter. Though her soldiers patrolled the streets and her spies watched the people, she could feel the undercurrent of rebellion growing. Rumors of a surviving heir reached her ears, though they were faint and unconfirmed. One day as she sat in her throne room, an advisor approached her cautiously. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice trembling, "there have been whispers. Some say that a child of the royal line still lives." Athaliah's eyes narrowed. "Whispers," she repeated coldly. "I silenced that line years ago. No one escaped." The advisor hesitated. "Still, the people talk. They say the temple priests are hiding something or someone." Athaliah rose from her throne, her robes trailing behind her like a dark shadow. "Double the patrols around the temple," she commanded, "and send spies among the priests. If they are hiding anything, I will know." At the temple, Jehoiada was well aware of the increased patrols. He could feel the noose tightening, but he also knew the time to act was drawing near. For years he had quietly rallied allies, priests, soldiers, and loyalists who longed to see Judah freed from Athaliah's tyranny. One night, Jehoiada gathered a small group of trusted priests in the temple's inner chamber. The flickering light of the menorah illuminated their determined faces. "We cannot wait much longer," Jehoiada said. "The boy is nearly old enough to claim his rightful place. The people are ready to follow him, but we must act wisely. Athaliah's spies are everywhere." One of the priests, an older man with a grizzled beard, spoke up. "What is the plan, Jehoiada? How do we reveal Joash without bringing Athaliah's wrath upon us all?" Jehoiada's eyes gleamed with determination. "During the Sabbath, the temple will be filled with worshippers. We will anoint Joash as king before the people and place him under the protection of loyal soldiers. Athaliah will not dare attack the temple in the presence of so many witnesses." The priests exchanged glances, their fear mingled with hope. "Will the people stand with us?" one asked. "They will," Jehoiada replied firmly. "The Lord is with us, and he will not let David's line be extinguished." As the weeks passed, Athaliah grew increasingly paranoid. Reports of unusual activity at the temple reached her desk, though they were vague and inconclusive. She began to suspect that her enemies were plotting against her. One evening, as she stood on the palace balcony overlooking the city, she clenched her fists. "They think they can outsmart me," she muttered, "but I will crush them all. Judah belongs to me." Yet even as she spoke, the temple walls echoed with quiet prayers and whispered plans. Joash, unaware of the full scope of the danger, continued his lessons with Jehoiada, preparing for the day when he would step into his destiny. The tension in Jerusalem was palpable. Athaliah's spies prowled the streets, and her soldiers marched in tight formations, but the whispers of rebellion could not be silenced. In the temple, Jehoiada knelt before the altar, his heart heavy with both hope and fear. "Lord," he prayed, "give us strength to restore your kingdom, protect the boy you have preserved, and guide us in the days to come." Above him, the stars shone brightly, as if offering a silent promise. The temple of the Lord stood in quiet defiance against the tyranny of Athaliah's reign. Within its sacred walls, Joash continued to grow under the watchful eyes of Jehosheba and Jehoiada. The boy, now 7, had become the center of a carefully guarded plan, a plan to reclaim Judah and restore the line of David. The priests and soldiers loyal to Jehoiada worked tirelessly in secret. Hidden chambers of the temple were transformed into meeting places where strategies were whispered, alliances were forged, and courage was steeled. The temple, once desecrated under Athaliah's rule, was now the heartbeat of a growing resistance. Jehoiada gathered his trusted allies one last time before the plan was set into motion. The inner chamber of the temple was dimly lit, the air heavy with anticipation. Joash sat quietly in a corner, listening as the men discussed the steps they would take to make him king. "The Sabbath will be our opportunity," Jehoiada said, his voice steady but firm. "The temple will be filled with worshippers, and we will anoint Joash in their presence. The people are ready. They will rally behind him." One of the soldiers, a burly man named Eliab, crossed his arms. And what of Athaliah's spies? They'll report back the moment they suspect anything. Jehoiada's gaze hardened. That's why we act swiftly. Loyal soldiers will guard the temple's entrances, and no one leaves without our permission. If Athaliah comes, she will face the people's fury. The room fell silent, the gravity of their plan settling over them. Then Joash spoke, his young voice breaking through the tension. "I'll do it," he said, his small hands clenched into fists. "If it will save Judah, I'll be king." Jehoiada placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are brave, Joash. The Lord has preserved you for this moment." As the Sabbath approached, tension gripped the city of Jerusalem. Athaliah, though still unaware of the full extent of the rebellion, could sense that something was brewing. The streets were quieter than usual. The people's eyes filled with a quiet determination that unsettled her. In the palace, Athaliah paced her chambers, her mind racing. "They're plotting something," she muttered. "But what? If there's a threat to my throne, I'll find it and I'll crush it." She summoned her guards. "Double the patrols near the temple," she ordered. "No one goes in or out without being questioned. And keep your eyes on Jehoiada. He's too quiet. He's hiding something." Her paranoia deepened, but she had no idea just how close she was to losing everything. The Sabbath arrived and the temple buzzed with activity. Worshippers gathered, their voices rising in songs of praise that echoed through the halls. But beneath the surface, there was an air of secrecy, of anticipation. Joash stood in a small chamber with Jehosheba and Jehoiada. The boy was dressed in simple yet regal robes, a crown waiting to be placed on his head. "Are you ready, Joash?" Jehosheba asked, her voice trembling with both pride and fear. Joash nodded. "I'm ready." Jehoiada took the boy by the hand and led him out into the main hall. The crowd fell silent as they saw the child, their eyes wide with disbelief and wonder. "This is Joash," Jehoiada proclaimed, his voice ringing out over the assembly. "The son of Ahaziah, the rightful king of Judah. The Lord has preserved him to restore the throne of David." The people gasped, their shock quickly turning to cheers. Trumpets blared as Jehoiada placed the crown on Joash's head and anointed him with oil. The young boy stood tall, his small frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the temple, but his presence filled the room with hope. "Long live the king!" the crowd roared, their voices shaking the very walls. Outside the temple, Athaliah's spies heard the commotion and rushed to report back to the palace. "Your Majesty," one of them panted as he burst into her chambers, "they've crowned a new king. A child, Joash, the son of Ahaziah. The people are rallying behind him at the temple." Athaliah's face twisted with rage. "Impossible!" she spat. "I ended that line years ago. This is treason!" She stormed out of the palace, her guards scrambling to follow. As Athaliah approached the temple, the sound of cheers and trumpets grew louder. When she entered the courtyard, her blood ran cold. There, standing before the people, was Joash, crowned and surrounded by loyal soldiers. "This is treachery!" Athaliah screamed, her voice echoing through the courtyard. "You dare defy your queen?" The people turned to face her, their expressions defiant. For the first time, Athaliah realized she was alone. Her power, built on fear and bloodshed, was crumbling before her eyes. Joash stepped forward, his young face calm but resolute. "You are not the queen," he said. "I am the rightful king of Judah." The crowd erupted in cheers once more, their voices drowning out Athaliah's protests. Jehoiada raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "Seizure," he commanded. Athaliah's guards hesitated, their loyalty wavering. One by one, they stepped back, leaving her defenseless. Loyal soldiers surrounded her, their faces grim. As she was dragged from the temple, Athaliah's screams echoed through the city. "You will all regret this," she cried. "Judah will burn without me." But her threats fell on deaf ears. Athaliah's cries echoed through the streets as she was dragged from the temple. Her once commanding presence had crumbled into desperation, her threats ringing hollow in the ears of the people. Those who had once feared her now stood united, their faces filled with the determination that no army could break. The soldiers brought Athaliah to the palace gates, where a crowd had gathered to witness the end of her tyrannical rule. She struggled against their grip, her voice hoarse from screaming. "You fools!" she spat, her eyes wild with fury. "Do you think this boy can save you? Without me, Judah will fall into ruin." But the people remained silent, their expressions resolute. They had endured years of oppression, and now they saw hope in the young king standing in the temple. In the temple, Jehoiada stood beside Joash, who was still adjusting to the weight of the crown on his head. The high priest turned to the boy, his voice steady. "This is only the beginning, Joash," he said. "Athaliah's reign has left Judah in chaos. The people look to you to restore what has been lost." Joash nodded, his young face filled with both determination and uncertainty. "I will do my best," he said. Jehoiada placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You are not alone. The Lord is with you, and so are we." Back at the palace gates, Athaliah was brought before a council of priests and soldiers. Jehoiada's voice echoed through the courtyard as he addressed the crowd. "Athaliah has betrayed Judah," he declared. "She has led the people away from the Lord, spilled innocent blood, and defiled the throne of David. Her reign ends here." The people erupted in cheers, their voices rising like a wave. Athaliah's defiance faltered as she realized there would be no reprieve, no last-minute salvation. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "spare me." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Athaliah was taken to a place outside the palace grounds where justice was carried out. Her reign of terror was over, and the shadow she had cast over Judah began to lift. With Athaliah gone, Joash was brought to the palace, where he was formally installed as king. The halls that had once echoed with fear now rang with the sound of hope and celebration. The first act of Joash's reign, guided by Jehoiada, was to restore the temple of the Lord. The altars to Baal were torn down, and the priests who had been forced into hiding returned to their rightful place. The people, inspired by their young king, rededicated themselves to the Lord. Years later, the story of Athaliah became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of ambition unchecked by humility and faith. But for Joash, it was a story of redemption, a testament to the power of God's plan and the courage of those who stood against darkness. Under Joash's reign, Judah began to heal. The people rebuilt their homes, their faith, and their trust in their leaders. Though the scars of Athaliah's rule remained, the line of David was restored, and hope, once again, flourished in the land. As Joash stood in the temple one evening, he looked up at the stars, his thoughts heavy with the responsibility he bore. "Lord," He prayed, "Thank you for preserving me and for those who risk everything to protect me. Guide me as I lead your people. Help me to honor you in all that I do." The stars seemed to shine brighter, as if offering their silent blessing. Joash smiled, feeling a deep peace settle over him. He was ready to lead, knowing that he was part of a story far greater than himself.